less than 50% of companies display salaries, and only around 25% of the jobs that we looked at had that posted. And as a company, that's something we really are trying to stand and push for, because we believe that salary transparency is integral to smashing those ceilings and ensuring equality. So this is something we're really calling for in the industry, to take this opportunity to build CDR up the right way from the beginning. You know, we don't want to be like the tech industry that like 10 years later is like, oh, whoops, looks like we have some problems here with equity and diversity.
Carbonsations, today's carbon industry leaders.
Welcome to the Carbonsations podcast, where we speak to some of the leading figures in the emerging carbon industry. Today, we're joined by Helen Lundebye, co-founder of CDRjobs, which is a platform dedicated to careers in the carbon dioxide removal space. Helen, thank you so much for being here. I can't wait to get into all the exciting stuff you guys have been up to and are currently doing. Even though CDRjobs was only launched recently, I'm sure it's already been massively helpful to the industry, and it's definitely filled a huge void. But before we get into all of that, if you've listened to any of the podcast episodes before, you know that it's tradition that we first get a better understanding of who our guests are. So Helen, please be so kind as to tell us a little bit more about yourself, what you used to do before CDRjobs, and how you wound up in the carbon industry to begin with.
All right. Well, yeah, thanks so much for having me, Viola. It's exciting to get to talk to you. And yes, I definitely, I think everyone has a very interesting, what I call CDR climate journey. So I have a very diverse background working in various kind of impact sectors over the last 2 decades. So I'm definitely no stranger to kind of like diving into something new head first. So I started off my career actually in special education in DC public schools, which is where I grew up. And then I moved into the UK and I transitioned in working to international development, working predominantly in research and the monitoring and evaluation spaces. And from that, I ended up working actually at a tech startup, developing biometric identification for the international development sector, where I kind of led our deployment team and the development of our curriculum for the use of our technology in projects across the globe, spanning kind of education, maternal health care, cash transfer projects. And this was like a really amazing opportunity. And I learned so much during this time in terms of particularly what's possible to achieve with just sheer determination, curiosity, grit, and creativity on how to solve novel problems. And it's kind of this mentality and this kind of startup mentality that is really something that I took away with from this incredible experience. And then I had some babies and COVID hit and the world just kind of turned upside down. And also it wasn't really possible for me to kind of be traveling the globe with 2 small babies. So as I was coming out of this fog of what I call motherhood and COVID a couple of years later, I was catching up with a friend of mine and former colleague, Sebastian Manhart, who I worked really closely with over the years in the tech startup. And he was working in CDR, actually, and his enthusiasm about the sector was contagious. And I suspect I'm not the only Sebastian Manhart kind of CDR convert out there. So we started working together again in a way that was kind of sustainable at first because I had 2 young children, and we've kind of been working symbiotically together in this industry, predominantly kind of working in the policy space and leveraging LinkedIn to kind of spread the word on CDR and kind of create this community together, which has been really amazing to be like part of and see developed. So yeah, that's kind of how I got into CDR, and that's where CDRjobs kind of emerged from this. Like, he vaguely commented, I think earlier this year, we were just like, yeah, we need to do something about jobs and, you know, kind of posting regularly about opportunities. And then I went away on a holiday and I came back and Sebastian was like, all right, that's it. We're just going to start a company. And I've already assembled a team to get us going with this product. And we're going to launch in 6 weeks.
Wow.
So yeah, so we launched in May and we've been working hard ever since.
Wow, that's super fast. 6 weeks is like nothing in any kind of terms. But wow, that's exciting.
Yeah, he doesn't do things by halves. And we got this amazing team together and we just kind of, got launched. But something that was really that people spoke to us quickly about was salaries. And that's kind of how the salary survey kind of came up, was one of our first kind of things. But yeah, I mean, our mission really as a company is to help transition the thousands and hopefully eventually millions of people to work in the CDR space because, I mean, I'm preaching to the choir, obviously, to the people who listen to your podcast, but I mean, there's no net zero without CDR. In order for our sector to reach climate relevance, we'll need to scale up rapidly. And with that, we'll need the talent in the sector to do that.
Of course. What was it like the very, very early days of launching the company and the platform, like gathering job postings? How did you get the word out?
Well, I mean, as most probably listeners have probably heard of Sebastian. And so we've created this kind of he has a following of 34,000 people now on LinkedIn. And so it was really easy kind of to spread the word about that. And it was something that really caught on quickly because I think it was filling a big void in the industry. And we have our kind of our unique selling point is that, unlike other job boards, you don't need to post your jobs on CDRjobs board. We kind of do that for you. So we gather all the jobs. And with that, we're able then also to derive crucial insights on how kind of the CDR market is growing. And our plan is to kind of share back that data to the ecosystem to make sure both the job seekers and the employers have the kind of data that they need to make the informed choices. And this insight will also be increasingly valuable so we can provide the economic case for CDR because as particularly the political context such as the US are changing and shifting away from kind of the climate change focus. And instead we need to be focusing on the kind of the market opportunities and the job creations that CDR provides. So, yeah.
So for any employers listening who haven't yet had the pleasure of listing their jobs on your platform, what would they have to do for that to happen?
Yeah, so absolutely. So we have had companies just reach out to us. So if you just go onto our website and it happens to be that we haven't found your company yet, because, we're always scouring and we're tracking currently around over 600 companies, close to 700 companies, but, new ones pop up all the time. And so, yeah, if for some reason we haven't caught your jobs, then please do reach out to us through the website and we can post that for you.
Excellent.
So, yeah, I think one of the challenges we have is that there are clear CDR companies, but then we also track, employers like, Microsoft has a whole kind of CDR team. So there are companies that are not necessarily CDR specific companies, but have CDR type jobs. So sometimes that's a challenge is to always define what counts as a CDR quote job, as well as how do we find those jobs.
Okay. And so based on your work so far and all the different kinds of pieces of data that you're gathering about the CDR job market, what would you say are the most desirable kind of jobs in the sector?
Yeah, so from that, we found, from our 2024 salary survey, we found engineering emerged as kind of the top, as over 1/3 of the roles were in engineering. And if you look today on our job board, actually it accounts for around 40% of job vacancies, spanning kind of mechanical engineering, electrical engineering, process engineering. So definitely, we're a building industry, right? So 1/3 of them are in engineering. The next one would be operations and project management, which makes sense because in order for those engineering things to happen, we have to have people managing and operate those operations and those projects. So about 29% of those are in that sector. And then the top third is also business development and sales. So obviously we need to sell these services and these technologies. So about 14% of the open roles right now are in business development and sales as well.
Okay. And Helen, since CDR is still such a new space and we're all expecting to see it grow and develop, but we're not quite at a point yet where the education system is really seeing trained professionals in the field, how much room is there for transferable skills in CDR? So say I'm working in an industry that isn't fulfilling to me and I want to focus my effort on supporting carbon removals. What are my chances of doing that?
That's a really good question and one that we get from a lot of our job seekers out there. So a super relevant question. And it's interesting because I've been speaking a lot with many of our clients to try and tease out what they're looking for, both in terms of actual skills and experience, but also in terms of mindset, right? To figure out what makes someone kind of successful in their company. And there's really been a wide range of answers to those questions. And some roles really will require the specialized experience that is very CDR specific. When you're talking about an enhanced rock weathering scientist, that's a very specific type of niche role we're looking at. But there is still a proportion of those roles that are, transferable. And the truth of the matter is we are a very young industry, like you said, and we will need to be getting the talent from other sectors in order to grow. The challenge is that a lot of these companies are early stage and they're startups and they don't really have kind of the time required always to onboard and get people up to speed, right? Because they're trying to build the things and do all the things. So another area that we need to really develop and figure out is how to onboard these kind of newbies into the CDR space as quickly as possible with as little overhead for the companies as possible. And sometimes that's up to the individual themselves, to be proactive. And again, that's sometimes a mindset that you're looking for in a hire. But there are also programs out there, such as the Air Miners Bootcamp program, that achieves kind of just that. And I think just today, Robert Hogland released his kind of free 1.5-hour crash course webinar, which is kind of a shortened version that he usually delivers to some of the companies that have hired him to do this. So yeah, in addition, there's also going to be adjacent sectors that people will be transitioning from. So for example, industries such as the oil and gas and power production kind of industries will start to be ramping down, hopefully. And there will be millions of jobs and people like coming from those jobs that will need to be looking for work. And the CDR industry is kind of a sector which has a lot of kind of transferable skills for them in terms of like manufacturing, machinery, geology. These are all that could translate potentially very well for CDR. But it is a new industry that requires like a diverse range of employments. I mean, CDR will require truck drivers, machine operators, engineers, like project operations management that oversee those various pieces. And we're going to have people working in offices that need to do the business development, the marketing, the administration, the software engineering. There will be people in the labs who need to develop the science and the prototyping of the various technologies that haven't even been invented yet. So it's all really exciting. There's basically a ginormous range that we will be needing to hire in. And there will be a subset of those that will need to be very specific with the skill sets, particularly when you're looking at research into certain types of technologies. But the truth is, there's not enough of those people to go around. So we will definitely need to be kind of learning how to transition those people, onboard those people, and get them on board.
I don't know if it's too early to be asking this right now, but how quickly would you say the job openings are becoming available in the market?
Yeah, it's hard to say. I mean, it's still a very early industry, right? I mean, I think in total, we have maybe 30,000 people working in CDR. We need to scale up rapidly. You know, we have projections saying that by 2050, Europe will have over 670,000 or 440,000 in the US. So it's really hard to see. Yeah, these are really big numbers that we have to get to. I guess the question is how we get up there, right? I think it helps to put that into context. Like the oil and gas industry currently employs indirectly through its whole supply chain, around 10.8 million jobs in the United States alone, which is around 5.4% of the entire US workforce. But that's an industry that's been established since the 1800s, right? We're much younger than that, but we need to become that size in order to become climate relevant, right? But at the moment, we have, currently right now on our job board, if you look, we have around 700 openings at any given time, right? So we're still very early stage, and I think that probably won't really ramp up massively until we maybe start to get into compliance markets, which won't be until closer to, it varies a lot, right? You hear 2026, you hear 2028, 2031. So it depends. But we're having a lot of startups are having a lot of challenges with getting the funding, through the VCMs and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, it's hard to say, but I think there might be we kind of might have reached a peak of employment at the moment. We had this hype cycle for CDR, and maybe now we're kind of reaching at the top of that S curve. And until we kind of see maybe compliance measures to ramp up CDR, we might not see a huge boom in that just yet. Let's see, fingers crossed.
Well, given recent political developments, hopefully that will be sooner than expected. But moving on to the CDRjobs salary report, which you mentioned earlier, you guys released that in September, which was highly intriguing and gave everyone a much fuller picture of what the job market is really like. And I know that there's just like so many interesting and important pieces of information in it. But if you were to summarize, especially for those of our listeners who haven't yet read the report, what would you say are the key findings?
Yeah, so definitely, I think the big number that came out of there that a lot of people were kind of surprised at, including ourselves, the kind of median salary globally, which was $115,000 per year. We always want to make sure that we caveat that was heavily skewed by the jobs in the United States, which are both represented almost like 3/4 of our data set, as well as the fact that that tends to be one of the highest paying countries globally. So if we removed that kind of data set, the US data set, it was closer to 80,000, which is kind of more in line to some of the other countries that we were seeing. So another takeaway that we had also was about geographic distribution of jobs. So there definitely is concentration of CDR hotspots, right? And half of all the jobs were just in 2 countries, the United States and Germany. And the top 7 countries represent 87% of those jobs. And so while a third of the jobs are kind of fully remote, or they're kind of caveated with like within 3 hours of your time zone or something like that, it still leaves out a huge talent globally of people wanting to work in CDR. The other thing that kind of came out of that report that was really important to us was about salary transparency and the lack of this data on postings. Less than 50% of companies display salaries, and only around 25% of the jobs that we looked at had that posted. And as a company, that's something we really are trying to stand and push for because we believe that salary transparency is integral to smashing those ceilings and ensuring equality. So this is something we're really calling for in the industry to take this opportunity to build CDR up the right way from the beginning. We don't want to be like the tech industry that like 10 years later is like, oh, whoops, looks like we have some problems here with equity and diversity. So that was something we really wanted to look at in the salary survey. So when we created this salary survey, we wanted to incorporate some of these dimensions. Some of the problems that we is a sensitive subject, so we didn't put these questions as mandatory, and these were kind of fully up to them to self-disclose that. So unfortunately, we didn't get enough robust data to look at ethnicity and disability, because, like I said, we didn't have enough data, and hopefully in future editions and rounds of this, we will be able to tease that out. However, we were able to look at gender, and so some of the interesting things that came out of that were twofold. One was reassuringly, our data did not reveal the gender pay gap. Women earn the same, if not more, than their male counterparts in many along. However, what was of concern is that we're seeing kind of at the executive level that fewer women, 28% of women, were represented in the C-suite. And of those, they had 14% lower salaries compared to their male counterparts. And this is kind of referred to as like the glass ceiling effect. So again, our data is preliminary. We're not saying we have the answers to this, but this is something that we wanted to shine a light on to ensure that companies are starting to look at this. And we're pushing for that salary transparency. We know that's difficult. These create difficult conversations, but I think it's the right ones to have. And if you're not comfortable with starting to post those for whatever reason, we're at least calling for companies to start keeping track of this internally so that they're keeping on top of this to make sure this is not something that becomes a problem.
Right. So I wanted to go back to two things that you mentioned. One is regarding how jobs are skewed. They're mainly in the United States and in Germany, you said. How does that look as far as roles go? Or is there any kind of interesting ratio there as well? Like are more roles of a certain type available in certain geographies?
That's interesting. Yeah, we didn't look in, we haven't had the time yet to look more kind of cross factors like that, but that is very interesting to look at. I mean, we're not getting that much data from the Global South yet, and we included in the salary report, you'll see that we did include some data, even though we didn't have very much of it, just because we wanted to show something about what's happening in the Global South. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see as that kind of progresses. I mean, the Global South is something that we're definitely looking to see rising, and we're seeing a lot of things happening, particularly out of Kenya and out of India. So yeah, stay tuned.
Do you have any data on remote jobs as well?
Other than, we didn't really see much disparity. So like I said, we had 1/3 that was fully remote. We had about another third roughly that was hybrid. And we didn't find any disparities in terms of salaries across kind of where your location was. So that was a good thing to see as well.
That's very interesting. And also the other thing that you mentioned was about companies sharing salary information. Would you say that the ones that do share that kind of information, they have more of an advantage, like they get more job applications than the others?
That we don't know because we don't have access to the data of who, what they end up doing when they hire those people. But that is something, yes, unfortunately, we don't have access to that information, so we don't know. But we think it's the right thing to do, and there's certain companies who are definitely leading the way on this. For example, Carbon 180 in the United States is very good at pushing this. So it's really a kind of values thing that we're trying to push across the board, but it's a challenge for a lot of companies because a lot of companies, particularly those that are coming from the Global South, are going to have a harder time competing for the talent. If you're talking about U.S. salaries versus Global South salaries, that's going to be difficult. And you're talking about companies that are operating with limited budget, right? So they're trying to, get the best bang for their buck. But I guess some of the things that we're trying to push for is that typically it's women and minorities who get the raw end of the deal when those salaries have to end up in negotiations. So that's where we're seeing the problem, right? Is like people aren't going to apply to those jobs sometimes when they don't see the salaries, but then also furthermore, when they're having that conversation later stage. I know myself, I've had very uncomfortable I never know how to answer that question. What is your salary expectations? Like, I don't really know. Where's this magic number coming from?
So do most people.
Exactly.
So do most people.
Well, not all people. I think the data shows that women, and people of color often have a harder time with those and often ended up with lower salaries than their white male counterparts in those conversations. So, yeah. It's a tricky one. It's not got an easy answer. I've had many conversations with different people who have different different challenges and answers to that. They're like, well, we don't know because what if we get an applicant from Brazil versus an applicant who lives in New York City? Like, is it fair to be paying them the same? So I guess the question is who's going to profit from that difference, right? Is the company is going to be profiting from that difference? And it gets to a much more tricky conversation. Like, are you paying for a certain quality of life, or are you paying for a role that you think adds value? And is it fair to place somebody who does the same role living in different countries? I don't know. I know I personally would not feel happy about getting paid substantially less than somebody just because they lived in New York City, for example. So it's tricky. In a globalized world, those are easy questions to answer, but there's something that I think we definitely need to be answering. And there are some companies that are doing a good job with this already.
Okay. And another question about the report I wanted to ask is, what CDR subsectors have the most openings?
Yeah. So in terms of CDR verticals, we saw that 1/3 of them are coming from DAC. And that's not surprising given the money that has been poured into both privately and publicly for DAC, particularly in the United States. So that was over 1/3 of jobs, like I said. And then the other kind of higher one was the kind of the ecosystem services, right? So the different market players that are kind of surrounding the ecosystem is also quite high. So yeah, but definitely DAC was the highest. But some of these others are kind of more nascent technologies. So we'll probably get to see hopefully more of them as they develop. But, for example, marine CDR was only 6% of them at the moment. But yeah, definitely direct air capture wins.
And so I would imagine it's mostly engineers there.
We didn't dig into that data. Hopefully, this was the first version of our report, and hopefully, as we do, subsequent editions of this, we will be able to dig in and definitely encourage anyone who's interested in either collaborating with us on this, because we're kind of a small team of 4 people trying to do all this, to look into some of those kind of cross dimensions of like looking at countries and different, when we look at the countries and the different verticals and the different jobs, if we're seeing any kind of interesting differences there that would be interesting to the ecosystem, we definitely let us know.
Okay. So based on your work so far and gender and minority issues aside, what other main problems are you seeing within the CDR jobs market?
So from the supply side, our job seekers, we definitely have data around how few jobs there are compared to how many job seekers. So, as I said, for example, we have almost 2,000 people subscribed who are interested in CDR jobs, looking to our newsletter. And at any one time, we have 700 jobs. And the challenge is that they're concentrated, like I said, in certain areas with only 30% of them being fully remote, which means that so many people can't access these jobs. The fact that so few jobs have salary, or there's not that many senior positions. We have had people say, like, I'm really interested in like a higher, the kind of C-suite opportunities. There's a concentration in certain areas in terms of roles, but we're currently seeing a lot kind of in the R&D phases, right? So we're seeing a lot of those engineerings, and people who are actively seeking are sometimes in the, we have, for example, very few policy openings at the moment. And so we have people. So the people who are interested are coming to us are often looking for roles that maybe are kind of going to develop in a later stage of the CDR journey. Right now, we're still very much in the research and development buildup of the stage. But I would say a lot of our job seekers are kind of coming at it from a more business development, policy, marketing side, which tend to be kind of later stage hires for companies. On the demand side, one challenge is kind of competitive pay and salaries, and trying to recruit from sectors such as tech, oil and gas, and renewables, where they get really good salaries. And, CDR companies often have more tight budgets than these companies and who they're trying to recruit from. So, and also we've found that another challenge is these specialized roles, which are sometimes quite difficult to find. So looking at these very specific types of engineers with the experience and say, a certain type of DAC technology or a certain ERW technology. And we're really trying to work with our clients to try and overcome these, because these type of people aren't necessarily accessing the usual channels of where you would find jobs, like posting on LinkedIn. Are you really going to find an enhanced weathering scientist by just posting it on LinkedIn, right? So we're trying to figure out, where do we need to tap into some of these markets? And it's the same thing when we're looking at like maintenance or building and construction type workers. Currently, our channels aren't really actively tapping into these type of markets. So that's something, as a company, we're definitely trying to figure out, is like, where do we need to go to find certain niche areas of talent? And a higher level, like I said, we're talking about, there's showing that there's fewer kind of numbers of CDR companies per year. So we're kind of, like I said, reaching maybe a peak of this hype, and it might take a few years for us to go and scale up even more. So, we've had a couple companies recently kind of go bust, like Running Tide and Nori. And the reality is we might see a few more of these go down in the next few years. So it might be a tough next few years. We'll see, to maintain the growth or compliance. But like you mentioned, maybe the things in the US, although it's seeming quite grim for some people, might be a positive for the CDR industry. I think it's a little bit too early to tell. It depends on how we manage to communicate the prospect of CDR to those new people in charge. So let's see what happens.
Helen, I have a final question for you, and that is, what's next for CDRjobs? What do you guys have lined up for the next weeks, months, years, maybe? Are there any announcements you have ready for us?
We're definitely continuing to plug away, make sure, and we're really nailing down the actual technology that we're building to enable kind of the smooth experience for our job seekers, so they can find all the jobs in the sector updated on a daily basis. So that's, we're working on smoothing our algorithms and things like that, and how we're scrubbing that data. The next thing that's really exciting is that we're trying to build insight flagship reports to develop for the ecosystem, which ties into our objective kind of building this just CDR industry. So we're kind of uniquely positioned to provide this information because we have all this data that we've accumulated. So something that we've got planned for next year is our 2025 salary survey. So building upon, like I said, our 2024, which is our very first version of this. And it'll be really great to get some more people responding to this, so that the more robust data set we have, the more insights we can provide. And like you said, kind of digging in a little bit more into more depth of the data that we do have. The next thing we want to look at is kind of looking at a 2024 market report. So kind of seeing how the data we accumulated over the last year has showed us how this market has developed over the past year. And then also we're wanting to work in this working in CDR report, because we know we have so many people who are curious about working in this industry, how they're going to get into this industry. So that's something we really want to work on and deliver to the ecosystem. And just in general, we've hired our first team member, our social media manager, to help us double down kind of on building up our brand and reaching beyond our kind of own community CDR bubble, so to speak, to help the clients get the talent they need to grow their companies and the industry as a whole kind of beyond this bubble. So we're just really excited about that. And let's stay tuned.
Absolutely. Can't wait to have another episode with you maybe a year from now, so we can catch up and see how things have developed.
Yep.
Helen, I really enjoyed this conversation with you. Thank you so much for coming on the show, and wishing you the best of luck to you and the CDRjobs project. God knows it's such an important one for the industry.
Thank you so much for having us.
If you enjoyed this episode of the Carbonsations podcast and would like to hear more conversations like this, please be sure to subscribe. We really appreciate the support.